The rifle shot split the evening air as Nora Blackett stood frozen on her father's porch, the engagement papers clutched in her trembling hands. At 18, she had never imagined her life would be bartered away to end a land dispute that had raged between the Blacketts and the Thorntons for nearly 2 decades. "Pa, please," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the distant cattle sounds. "There must be another way." Abraham Blackett, weathered by 40 years of Kansas sun and hardship, didn't meet his daughter's gaze. "Already signed the papers, girl. You'll marry Preston Thornton come Sunday, and that'll be the end of it. The feud stops with this union." It was 1879, and Dodge City, Kansas, had seen its share of cattle drives and gunfights. But this particular standoff between two of the area's most stubborn ranching families had become legend. What had started as a dispute over water rights had escalated into something ugly after Nora's mother died in a stampede that the Blacketts blamed on Thornton negligence. "That man is 38 years old," Nora protested, her blue eyes flashing, "and cruel to his horses." "What kind of husband would he make?" Her father's face hardened. "The kind that'll bring peace to this valley, one wedding in exchange for no more bloodshed. It's decided." The sound of approaching hoofbeats made them both turn. A lone rider was coming up the dusty drive, silhouetted against the setting sun. Even at a distance, Nora recognized the broad shoulders and easy posture of Brody O'Malley, the new foreman from the Rockingham Ranch to the north. He pulled his chestnut gelding to a stop, dust swirling around them. "Evening, Mr. Blackett. Miss Blackett." His voice carried a soft drawl, and his eyes, warm amber beneath the shadow of his hat, lingered on Nora a moment too long. "What brings you by, O'Malley?" Abraham asked, suspicious of any stranger's presence during such tense times. "Just returning your stray heifer." Brody nodded toward the small animal trotting behind his horse. "Found her mixed in with our herd." Nora knew that wasn't entirely true. Brody had been finding excuses to ride by the Blackett Ranch for weeks now, ever since they danced together at the spring social. Each time, her heart betrayed her with its quickened pace. "Appreciate it," Abraham said curtly. "You've heard about the arrangement with the Thorntons, I suppose." News travels fast. Brody's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "I heard." Nora felt heat rise to her cheeks. The thought that everyone in the county was discussing her impending marriage to a man she detested made her stomach turn. "Well, we won't keep you," her father said, dismissing the cowboy. But before Brody turned to leave, his eyes met Nora's. Something passed between them, a question, perhaps, or a promise. Then he tipped his hat, turned his horse, and rode away. That night, Nora couldn't sleep. She paced her small bedroom, thinking of Preston Thornton's cold eyes and rough hands. She thought of the short, miserable life that awaited her as his wife. And then, almost against her will, she thought of Brody O'Malley's gentle smile and the way he always treated her like she had a mind of her own. As dawn broke over the prairie, Nora heard it again, hoofbeats. Soft, deliberate, approaching from the back of the house. She slipped from her bed and peered through the curtains to see Brody dismounting beneath her window. Without thinking, she threw on her dress and boots and crept downstairs, careful not to wake her father or their ranch hand, old Emmett, who slept in the bunkhouse. "What are you doing here?" she whispered when she reached Brody in the shadows of the barn. His face was serious, his eyes intense. "I've come to ask if this marriage is what you want." The directness of his question caught her off guard. No one had asked what she wanted, not her father, not the Thorntons, not the preacher who would perform the ceremony. "No," she admitted, her voice breaking, "but my father believes it's the only way to end the feud." "There's always another way," Brody said, stepping closer. "I've got a small place up north near the Colorado border. It's not much, but it's mine, free and clear. Nora's heart began to race. What are you saying? I'm saying I can't stand by and watch you sacrificed for a peace that won't last. Preston Thornton is a vengeful man. This marriage won't satisfy him, it'll just give him power over your family through you. You barely know me, Nora whispered, though her traitorous heart was already leaping at his implied offer. I know enough, he replied. I know you're kind and brave and too smart to be wasted on a man like Thornton. And I know I've thought about you every day since I first saw you. 1,000 thoughts raced through Nora's mind: duty, family, consequences. But louder than all of these was the voice that had been silenced for too long, her own. If I left with you, she said slowly, the feud would only worsen. Maybe at first, Brody conceded, but sometimes you have to make things worse before they can get better. The truth is, this feud needs to be resolved through justice, not sacrifice. Before Nora could respond, the sound of a door slamming made them both freeze. Abraham Blackett stood on the back porch, rifle in hand. Get away from my daughter, O'Malley, he growled. Brody stepped forward, placing himself between Nora and the gun. Mr. Blackett, I mean no disrespect, but this arrangement with the Thorntons is wrong. Your daughter deserves better. Better than ending a feud that's killed 3 men already, Abraham's voice rose. What would you know about it? You've been here all of 6 months. I know that trading your daughter like cattle won't bring peace, Brody said steadily. It'll just give the Thorntons what they've always wanted: your land through marriage. Nora saw the flicker of doubt in her father's eyes. It was brief, but it was there. Pa, she said gently, Preston doesn't want me. He wants what marrying me would bring him. Abraham's hands tightened on the rifle. Go back in the house, Nora. No, she said, surprised by her own defiance. I won't be the price of peace in a war I didn't start. For a tense moment, no one moved. Then Abraham lowered his rifle slightly. What's your play here, O'Malley? You think you can just ride in and take her? The Thorntons will hunt you both down. Not if they understand the real reason for this feud, Brody replied. I've been asking questions, Mr. Blackett, about the water rights, about the stampede that killed your wife. There's more to this story than most people know. Abraham's face paled. What are you talking about? The Thorntons diverted that creek deliberately during the driest season in decades. And the stampede wasn't an accident. I found a ranch hand who was paid to fire those shots that spooked your cattle, paid by Jacob Thornton himself. Nora gasped. Her mother's death had never been fully explained, a freak accident, they'd said. Cattle spooked by a thunderstorm, perhaps. You're lying, Abraham whispered, but his voice lacked conviction. I'm not, Brody said, and I can prove it. The hand who fired those shots is in Wichita now, willing to testify. He's been living with the guilt for years. Abraham's rifle lowered completely. Even if that's true, the law in these parts has always favored the Thorntons. They've got the sheriff in their pocket. The federal marshal isn't in anyone's pocket, Brody countered, and he'll be in Dodge City tomorrow. A new voice cut through the tense air. Well, isn't this cozy? Preston Thornton emerged from the shadows of the barn, his own gun drawn. Behind him stood 2 of his ranch hands. Planning a little betrayal, are we? Nora felt a chill run through her. How long had he been listening? Preston, Abraham acknowledged stiffly. This isn't what it looks like. Isn't it? Preston's smile didn't reach his eyes. Looks to me like your daughter's getting mighty friendly with this drifter. And here I thought we had an agreement, Blackett. Brody moved slightly, positioning himself better between Nora and the newcomers. This isn't about agreements. This is about justice for Mrs. Blackett. Preston's laugh was harsh. Ancient history. Accidents happen on the range. It wasn't an accident, Brody said evenly, and I can prove it. Something dangerous flickered in Preston's eyes. "You should have minded your own business, cowboy." He raised his gun. "I think it's time we showed Mr. O'Malley what happens to men who interfere in Thornton affairs." What happened next was a blur. Abraham shouted a warning. Brody lunged for Nora, pulling her down as the first shot rang out. She heard her father return fire, saw one of Preston's men fall. Then Brody was lifting her onto his horse, swinging up behind her. "Hold on," he shouted, spurring the gelding forward. They thundered away from the ranch, bullets kicking up dust behind them. Nora clung to the saddle horn, her heart pounding in her ears. Behind them, she could hear shouting and the sound of more horses giving chase. "My father," she cried. "He's buying us time," Brody called back. "We'll circle around to Dodge City and find the marshal. It's the only way to end this now." They rode hard through the dawn, cutting across fields and through shallow streams to throw off pursuit. By the time the sun was fully up, they had reached a small wooded area where a clear creek gurgled peacefully. Brody finally slowed the exhausted horse. "We'll rest here a while," he said, helping Nora dismount. Her legs trembled, unused to such hard riding. "I can't believe this is happening," she said, sinking onto a fallen log. "My father, do you think he's all right?" Brody knelt by the creek, filling his canteen. "Your father's a tough man, and he knows these lands better than the Thorntons. My guess is he's headed for the Mitchell place. They've been allies of your family for years." He handed her the canteen, and she drank gratefully. "Why are you doing this? Getting involved in a feud that isn't yours?" Brody was quiet for a moment, attending to his horse. "When I first came to this county, I heard about the Blackett-Thornton feud. Just another range war, I thought. But then I met you at that dance, and suddenly it wasn't just a story anymore." He sat beside her on the log, careful to maintain a respectful distance. "I started asking questions. The more I learned, the more I realized this wasn't a simple dispute over land or water. This was about one family, the Thorntons, systematically trying to drive another family out." "But why risk everything?" Nora pressed. "Your job, your safety." Brody looked at her then, his amber eyes serious. "Because sometimes a man has to stand for what's right, even when it's not the easy path. And because—" He hesitated, then continued more softly, "because I couldn't bear the thought of you married to a man like Preston Thornton." The honesty in his voice made Nora's cheeks flush. In that moment, despite the danger they were in, she felt something she hadn't felt in years: hope. "What happens now?" she asked. "We rest for an hour, then make our way to Dodge City. The federal marshal should be arriving on the noon train. If your father makes it to the Mitchell place, he'll likely head for town as well. Together, with the testimony we have, we can finally bring the truth to light." Nora nodded, trying to believe it could be that simple. But a lifetime of watching the feud simmer and explode had taught her that nothing involving the Thorntons was ever resolved easily. "Preston won't give up," she said. "He's wanted our land for years. The water rights to our creek would double the value of his southern pastures. That's why he was so eager for this marriage," Brody agreed. "With you as his wife, your father's land would eventually become Thornton property. No shots fired, no obvious theft, just the natural order of inheritance." The realization made Nora sick. She'd known Preston's interest in her wasn't romantic, but she hadn't fully understood the calculated nature of the arrangement until now. "We should move," Brody said after they'd rested. "The Thorntons know these lands too." They mounted up again, Brody in the saddle and Nora riding behind him this time, her arms around his waist. Despite everything, she couldn't help noticing the solid strength of him, the careful way he guided the horse over rough terrain to make the ride easier for her. They kept to the trees where possible, avoiding the open prairie where they could be easily spotted. By mid-morning, They could see Dodge City in the distance, its buildings shimmering in the heat. "We'll approach from the north," Brody decided. "Less chance of running into Thornton men that way." But as they neared the outskirts of town, Nora felt Brody tense. "Riders," he said quietly, "coming up fast behind us." She turned to look. 3 men on horseback were galloping toward them, dust billowing behind them. Even at a distance, she recognized Preston's distinctive black stallion in the lead. "They found us," she whispered. Brody urged their horse to a faster pace, but the gelding was already tired from the morning's hard ride. The pursuers were gaining ground. "There's a ravine up ahead," Brody said. "If we can reach it, we might be able to lose them in the brush." They raced toward the narrow cut in the earth, but a shot rang out, kicking up dirt just ahead of them. Their horse reared in alarm, nearly unseating them both. "Hold tight," Brody called, regaining control and spurring the animal forward again. More shots followed, uncomfortably close. Nora ducked her head against Brody's back, her heart pounding in terror. They were almost to the ravine when she felt Brody jerk and heard him grunt in pain. "Brody," she cried. "I'm all right," he said through gritted teeth. "Just grazed my arm." But she could feel the warm wetness of blood where her hand pressed against his side. They plunged into the ravine, the horse picking its way carefully down the steep slope. Behind them, their pursuers had to slow as well, buying them precious moments. At the bottom, Brody suddenly turned the horse sharply right, into a narrow side channel almost hidden by overhanging brush. They ducked low as branches whipped past their faces. The sound of pursuit grew slightly distant. The Thornton men had continued down the main ravine. "Quick thinking," Nora said, relief washing over her. "Old hunting trick," Brody replied, his voice tight with pain. "Now we just need to make it to town without being spotted again." They emerged from the ravine a quarter-mile from where they'd entered, well hidden from the main trail. In the distance, Dodge City beckoned, its streets busy with the usual midday traffic. "We'll take the back way in," Brody decided, "through the cattle pens. There'll be enough commotion there to cover our arrival." They rode cautiously, staying close to a line of cottonwoods that offered some cover. As they approached the stockyards, the smell of cattle and dust grew stronger, and the sounds of cowboys working the herds filled the air. True to Brody's prediction, no one paid much attention to 2 more riders entering town amid the confusion of a cattle drive coming in from the south. They made their way to the marshal's office without incident, tying their horse at a hitching post across the street. "Wait here," Brody told Nora. "Let me make sure the federal marshal has arrived." "You're hurt," she protested, seeing the bloodstain spreading on his shirt. "It's nothing serious." He gave her a reassuring smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Just keep watch. If you see any Thornton men, duck into that dress shop behind you." Nora nodded, her eyes scanning the busy street anxiously as Brody crossed to the marshal's office. He returned moments later, his expression grim. "Marshal Bennett's train is delayed. Won't be here until evening." Nora's heart sank. "What do we do now?" Brody glanced up and down the street. "We need a safe place to wait, and I need to get word to your father that we're in town." A sudden commotion at the end of the street caught their attention. 3 riders had just arrived, dusty and hard-faced. Preston Thornton was in the lead, his expression thunderous as he scanned the crowded thoroughfare. "Too late," Brody muttered. "Quick, this way." He took Nora's arm and guided her swiftly down a side alley. They hurried past stacked crates and barrels, emerging onto a quieter street lined with modest homes. "Where are we going?" Nora asked. "I know someone," Brody replied. "Someone who owes me a favor." He led her to a small house set back from the street, its yard neat but simple. A woman in her 50s answered their knock, her eyes widening at the sight of Brody's blood-stained shirt. "Good Lord, O'Malley, what have you gotten yourself into now?" she asked, but she was already ushering them inside. "Mrs. Holloway, this is Nora Blackett," Brody said once they were safely inside. "We need a place to stay out of sight until evening, and I could use a bit of patching up." The woman's sharp eyes took in Nora's disheveled appearance and Brody's wound. "Blackett, you say? As in Abraham Blackett's daughter? The one who's supposed to be marrying Preston Thornton come Sunday?" Nora nodded, suddenly aware of how this must look. Mrs. Holloway sighed. "I always said that Feud would come to no good end. Sit down, Mr. O'Malley, and let me see that wound. Miss Blackett, there's water in that pitcher if you'd like to freshen up." As Mrs. Holloway tended to Brody's injury, a bullet grazed along his ribs that looked painful but not life-threatening. She explained that her late husband had worked with Brody years ago in Colorado. "When my Thomas fell ill, this young man rode 2 days through a blizzard to bring the doctor," she said. "So yes, I owe him a favor, though harboring a pair of fugitives from the Thorntons wasn't exactly what I had in mind." "We're not fugitives," Nora protested. "We're trying to end this feud, not extend it. Brody has evidence that my mother's death wasn't an accident, that the Thorntons were behind it." Mrs. Holloway paused in her bandaging. "That would change things considerably. The whole county believed that stampede was just bad luck." "It wasn't," Brody said grimly. "And once the federal marshal hears the testimony we've gathered, the truth will come out. In the meantime," Mrs. Holloway said, finishing her work, "you'll both stay here. I'll see what I can find out about your father, Miss Blackett, and about the Thorntons' movements in town." True to her word, Mrs. Holloway returned an hour later with news. Abraham Blackett had indeed made it to the Mitchell ranch, and was now on his way to Dodge City with several Mitchell men as backup. The Thorntons, meanwhile, had split up to search the town, with Preston taking particular interest in the area around the train station. "They're expecting you to try to leave," Mrs. Holloway surmised. "They don't realize you're waiting for someone to arrive." As evening approached, Brody grew increasingly restless. "The marshal's train should be coming in soon. We need to get to the station." "The Thorntons will be watching it," Nora reminded him. "Yes, but they'll be watching for 2 people trying to board a train, not meet one," Brody reasoned. "Besides, your father should be arriving in town by now. With his help, we can confront Preston with witnesses present." Mrs. Holloway insisted on helping. She would go ahead to the station and watch for Abraham Blackett, directing him to a meeting point near the depot's south end where there were fewer people. Brody and Nora would approach from the back streets, avoiding the main thoroughfare. The plan set, they waited for darkness to fall. Mrs. Holloway left first, carrying a basket as if simply running an evening errand. "Ready?" Brody asked Nora when it was their turn to go. She nodded, though her stomach was in knots. Everything had happened so quickly just that morning. She had been resigned to her fate as Preston Thornton's wife. Now she was risking everything on a desperate gambit for justice and, perhaps, freedom. They slipped out the back door and made their way through gardens and service alleys, keeping to the shadows. The station was lit up brightly, its platform filled with people awaiting the evening train. From their vantage point behind a feed store, they could see Preston and one of his men watching the station's main entrance. Of Mrs. Holloway or Abraham Blackett, there was no sign. "There," Brody whispered suddenly, pointing to the far end of the platform. "Your father." Nora's heart leapt as she saw the familiar figure of Abraham Blackett, accompanied by John Mitchell and 2 of his ranch hands. They were speaking with Mrs. Holloway, who was gesturing toward the meeting point. "Now we just need to reach them without being seen by Preston," Brody said. They circled wide around the station, keeping buildings between themselves and the Thornton men. They were nearly to the rendezvous point when a voice called out behind them. "That's far enough, O'Malley." They turned to find themselves facing Preston's second man, his gun already drawn. Nora felt her blood run cold. "You've caused enough trouble," the man said, his eyes hard. "Mr. Thornton wants a word with his fiancée." Brody shifted slightly, putting himself between Nora and the gun. "She's not his fiancée. That arrangement was made under false pretenses." "That's not for you to decide," the man sneered. "Now, nice and easy, you're both coming with me." The distant whistle of an approaching train pierced the air. The marshal would be arriving any minute, if they could just delay. "I'll go," Nora said suddenly, stepping forward. "But Mr. O'Malley stays here." Both men looked at her in surprise. "Nora, no," Brody began, but she silenced him with a look. "This is my family's feud," she said firmly. "I won't have anyone else hurt because of it." To Preston's man, she added, "Take me to Mr. Thornton. I'll explain everything." The gunman hesitated, clearly not expecting this turn of events. "Both of you," he insisted. "The girl only," came another voice. Abraham Blackett stepped into view, his rifle trained on the Thornton man. "Lower your weapon, Davis, you're outgunned." Indeed, John Mitchell and his men had also appeared, spreading out to surround them. The standoff might have ended there, but at that moment, the train pulled into the station with a screech of brakes and a billow of steam. The distraction was enough for Davis to grab Nora's arm, yanking her in front of him as a shield. "Nobody move," he shouted, "or the girl gets hurt." Passengers began to disembark from the train, creating confusion on the platform. Among them was a tall man in a long coat, a federal marshal's badge glinting on his chest. "What's going on here?" the newcomer demanded, his hand moving to his own weapon. "Marshal Bennett," Brody called out, "we've been waiting for you. This is about the Blackett-Thornton feud." The marshal's eyes narrowed as he took in the tense scene. "Everyone calm down. Let's discuss this civilized, without guns." "There's nothing to discuss." Preston Thornton appeared from the crowd, his own weapon drawn. "This man," he pointed at Brody, "kidnapped my fiancée and has been spreading lies about my family." "That's not true," Nora cried, still in Davis's grip. "Brody rescued me from a forced marriage, and he has proof that the Thorntons were responsible for my mother's death." Marshal Bennett held up a hand. "One thing at a time. First, let the young lady go, Davis." "Not until this is settled," Preston snapped. "She's promised to me. We have papers." "Papers signed under duress and false pretenses," Abraham Blackett countered. "Marshal, my wife died in a stampede 7 years ago. We always thought it was an accident, but this man," he nodded toward Brody, "has found a witness who says the stampede was deliberately caused by Thornton men." A murmur ran through the growing crowd of onlookers. Preston's face darkened with fury. "Lies, all lies. We can settle this right now," Brody said. "The witness is here in Dodge City, Jake Mercer. He worked for the Thorntons 7 years ago." Preston's face went pale. "Mercer left these parts years ago. He came back," Brody said, "because his conscience wouldn't let him rest. He's staying at the Dodge house under a different name, but he's ready to testify about who paid him to fire those shots that spooked the Blackett herd that day." For a moment, no one moved. Then Davis, perhaps sensing his employer's panic, made a desperate decision. He shoved Nora hard toward Brody and raised his gun toward Abraham Blackett. Several things happened at once. Brody caught Nora as she stumbled. Abraham ducked. John Mitchell fired a warning shot. And Marshal Bennett's voice cut through the chaos like a whip. "That's enough." The authority in his tone froze everyone in place. "Davis, drop that weapon or I'll drop you," the marshal ordered. "Preston Thornton, you too." Everyone with a gun, lower it now or face federal charges for interfering with a U.S. Marshal. Slowly, reluctantly, guns were lowered. Davis, seeing Preston comply, followed suit. "Now," Marshal Bennett continued, "I want to hear this evidence. Mr. O'Malley, bring your witness to my office in 1 hour. Mr. Blackett, you and your daughter will join us. Mr. Thornton, you as well. The rest of you disperse. This is official business now." The crowd began to break up, many heading to the saloons to spread word of the confrontation. Preston Thornton, his face a mask of barely controlled rage, stalked off with Davis in tow, but not before hissing to Brody, "This isn't over, Cowboy." An hour later, they were all assembled in the marshal's office: Abraham and Nora Blackett, Brody O'Malley, Preston Thornton, and a nervous-looking man with weathered features and guilty eyes, Jake Mercer. "Start from the beginning," Marshal Bennett instructed, once everyone was seated. Jake Mercer twisted his hat in his hands as he spoke. "7 years ago, I was working as a hand for the Thornton Ranch. Times were hard, and when Jacob Thornton, Preston's father, offered me extra money for a special job, I didn't ask too many questions." Preston shifted uncomfortably, but remained silent. "He wanted me to spook the Blackett herd during their drive to the holding pens near the creek. Said it would teach them a lesson about claiming water rights that weren't theirs. I was to fire shots near the cattle, get them running, then disappear." Mercer's voice cracked. "I didn't know Mrs. Blackett would be there. Didn't know anyone would get hurt. It was supposed to just scatter the cattle, cause some trouble rounding them up again." Abraham Blackett's face was like stone. "My wife went to check on a calf. She was caught in the stampede, crushed to death." Mercer couldn't meet his eyes. "I've lived with that every day since. When I heard O'Malley was asking questions, tracking me down, I knew it was time to face what I'd done." Marshal Bennett turned to Preston. "Did you know about this plan?" Preston's lawyer, who had joined them, interjected smoothly. "My client was not involved in ranch operations at that time. He was away at school in St. Louis." "That's a convenient excuse," Brody said sharply. "But what about the recent efforts to force a marriage between Preston and Miss Blackett? That was clearly a land grab disguised as peacemaking." The lawyer began to protest, but Preston cut him off. "The marriage was my father's idea before he died, to end the feud, that's all. By taking control of our land," Abraham pointed out. "Once Nora was your wife, you'd have legal claim to the Blackett Ranch when I'm gone." The marshal held up his hand again. "One issue at a time. Mr. Mercer's testimony is serious. It indicates that Jacob Thornton was responsible for criminal negligence resulting in death. Even though he's deceased, this changes the nature of the feud significantly." He turned to Preston. "As for the marriage arrangement, while distasteful, arranged marriages themselves aren't illegal. However, if it was entered into based on false pretenses or coercion, that's another matter." "I was coerced," Nora spoke up. "Told that if I didn't agree, the violence would continue, that more people would die." The marshal nodded thoughtfully. "Given these revelations, I believe the original water rights dispute needs to be revisited by the territorial court. And in light of Mr. Mercer's testimony about the circumstances of Mrs. Blackett's death, compensation to the Blackett family may be appropriate." Preston's face flushed with anger. "This is absurd. The word of a drifter and a guilty conscience against a respected family name." "The evidence speaks for itself," Marshal Bennett replied calmly. "I'll be taking Mr. Mercer's official statement, and I suggest you prepare for a legal battle, Mr. Thornton. The days of settling disputes with guns and forced marriages are over in this territory." The meeting concluded with the marshal outlining next steps: formal statements from all parties, arrangements for a territorial court hearing, and strict warnings against any further violence. As they left the office, Preston brushed past Brody, muttering, "You've made a powerful enemy, O'Malley. Watch your back." Nora, overhearing, felt a chill despite the warm evening air. The formal proceedings might be moving in their favor, but Preston Thornton was not a man to accept defeat gracefully. "Don't worry," Brody said, noticing her concern. "He's all talk now that the law's involved." They joined Abraham, who was standing quietly on the boardwalk. "Thank you," he said to Brody after a moment, "for discovering the truth, for standing up when I couldn't see past my own anger." Brody nodded. "Anyone would have done the same." "No," Abraham shook his head. "Most men would have minded their own business. You didn't. You risked everything for justice, and for my daughter." The acknowledgement hung in the air between them. Nora felt her cheeks warm as her father's perceptive gaze moved between her and Brody. "Where will you go now?" Abraham asked Brody. "I assume the rocking M won't keep you on after this." It was true Brody's involvement in the feud had cost him his position as foreman. The ranch owner, not wanting trouble with either the Blacketts or the Thorntons, had made that clear days ago. "I've got some savings," Brody said. "Enough to make a start somewhere new." Abraham nodded slowly. "Or you could stay. The Blackett Ranch could use a man with your skills and your integrity." Nora looked at her father in surprise. This was as close to a blessing as Abraham Blackett was likely to give. Brody's eyes found Nora's, a question in them. She felt her heart skip a beat as she gave him a small smile of encouragement. "I'd be honored, Mr. Blackett," Brody said, his voice steady but his eyes never leaving Nora's face. "But I think that decision might involve more than just you and me." Abraham cleared his throat. "Well, I'm headed back to the Mitchell place tonight. They're putting me up until this business is settled." "Nora, you coming?" Nora hesitated. "I'd like to stay in town, Pa. Mrs. Holloway offered me a room and I'd feel safer here for now." Her father studied her face for a long moment, then nodded. "Probably wise. The Thorntons might not try anything in town with the marshal watching. O'Malley, I'm trusting you to see she stays safe." "With my life, sir," Brody promised. As Abraham rode off with the Mitchell men, Nora and Brody walked slowly back toward Mrs. Holloway's house. "Did you mean it?" Nora asked after they'd gone a block in companionable silence. "About staying," Brody stopped, turning to face her under the glow of a street lamp. "I meant every word. But your father's offer isn't the only reason I'd stay." The intensity in his eyes made her breath catch. "What's the other reason?" Instead of answering immediately, he reached out to brush a strand of hair from her face, his touch gentle. "From the moment I saw you at that dance, something inside me recognized something in you. I can't explain it better than that. All I know is that these past months, getting to know you, seeing your strength and kindness, I found myself thinking of reasons to ride by your ranch, just to catch a glimpse of you." Nora felt as though her heart might burst from her chest. No one had ever spoken to her this way, with respect and admiration, rather than treating her as property to be claimed. "I don't have much to offer," Brody continued. "I'm not a wealthy man, but I promise you this: I will never see you as a means to an end, never use you as a pawn in someone else's game." "That's more than most men offer," Nora said softly, "and worth more than all the Thornton wealth." A comfortable silence fell between them, full of unspoken promises and possibilities. They continued their walk, slightly closer than before, their hands occasionally brushing. Mrs. Holloway welcomed them with hot coffee and a knowing smile. "The marshal's secretary stopped by," she told them. "Left word that the territorial judge will be arriving next week to hear the case. Until then, you're both welcome to stay here." The next few days passed in a strange limbo. The town buzzed with gossip about the Blackett-Thornton feud and its dramatic new developments. Preston Thornton and his men remained in Dodge City, staying at the Grand Hotel and keeping mostly to themselves, though their dark looks whenever they passed Brody or Nora on the street spoke volumes. Abraham Blackett rode into town daily, meeting with the marshal and consulting with a lawyer he'd retained. The evidence against the Thorntons was mounting, not just Mercer's testimony, but records showing that the original water rights had indeed been legally granted to the Blackett family, contrary to Jacob Thornton's claims. For Nora and Brody, these days of waiting brought an unexpected gift: time together away from the immediate danger, time to learn each other's stories and dreams. They took walks along the quieter streets, sat on Mrs. Holloway's porch in the evenings, and slowly, cautiously, allowed their feelings for each other to grow from attraction into something deeper. "Tell me about your family," Nora asked one evening as they sat watching the sunset. "You know all about mine, but you've hardly mentioned yours." Brody's expression grew thoughtful. "Not much to tell. My parents had a small farm in Missouri. Both gone now. Fever took them when I was 16. I had a younger sister, but she passed too. After that, I headed west. Worked cattle drives, ranch jobs, whatever paid honest wages." "I'm sorry about your family," Nora said softly. "It must have been hard being alone so young." "It was," he admitted. "But it taught me to be self-sufficient, to value the connections I do make all the more." He glanced at her. "What about you? What would you have done if all this hadn't happened? If you hadn't been promised to Thornton?" Nora considered the question. "Honestly, I never allowed myself to think too far ahead. The feud has overshadowed everything for so long, but I always loved books. Teaching, maybe. There's a shortage of teachers out here. You'd be good at that." Brody smiled. "You've got a natural way of explaining things, patient but firm." She laughed. "How would you know?" "I've watched you with Mrs. Holloway's grandchildren when they visit. The way you showed them how to play that card game yesterday, breaking it down step by step, encouraging them. That's a born teacher." The fact that he'd noticed such a small thing, that he'd seen something in her beyond just her appearance or her family name, warmed Nora from within. As the day of the territorial judge's arrival approached, tension in town increased. Rumors circulated that the Thorntons had sent for reinforcements from their ranch, that they wouldn't accept an unfavorable ruling without a fight. The night before the hearing, Abraham Blackett joined Nora and Brody for dinner at Mrs. Holloway's house. The conversation was stilted at first, with Abraham still adjusting to the obvious connection that had formed between his daughter and the cowboy. "If the ruling goes our way," Abraham said over apple pie, "there's going to be backlash. The Thorntons won't just accept defeat and shake hands." "We'll be prepared," Brody assured him. "Marshal Bennett has already arranged for extra deputies to be present tomorrow." Abraham nodded, but his expression remained troubled. "It's not just tomorrow I'm worried about, it's the weeks and months after. They know where our ranch is. They know our routines." "Then we change them," Brody suggested. "Increase security, vary the schedule of cattle drives, bring in some trusted hands from other ranches temporarily." The discussion continued as they planned contingencies. Throughout it all, Nora was struck by how naturally Brody had stepped into a protective role for her family, not out of a desire to control, as Preston would have done, but out of genuine concern. Later, as Abraham prepared to return to the Mitchell Ranch for the night, he took Brody aside for a private word. Nora couldn't hear what was said, but when Brody rejoined her, there was a new certainty in his expression. "What did my father say to you?" she asked. Brody's smile was small but significant. "He said that whatever happens tomorrow, he considers the Blackett debt to be paid in full. That from now on, any relationship between me and his family, especially his daughter, would be based on what we choose, not on obligation. Nora's heart leapt. And what did you say? I said that was exactly how I wanted it to be. The morning of the hearing dawned clear and hot. By 9 o'clock, the town hall was packed with spectators eager to witness the resolution of the county's longest-running feud. The territorial judge, a stern-faced man named Harlan Crawford, called the proceedings to order with a bang of his gavel. For hours, testimonies were given and evidence presented. Jake Mercer nervously recounted his role in the stampede that killed Elizabeth Blackett. Land surveyors confirmed the original boundaries and water rights. Preston Thornton's lawyer tried to discredit the witnesses, but the weight of evidence was overwhelming. When the judge finally delivered his ruling, it was decisive. The water rights legally belonged to the Blackett Ranch and always had. The Thornton family was ordered to pay substantial damages for the wrongful death of Elizabeth Blackett. And the marriage contract between Preston Thornton and Nora Blackett was declared null and void due to evidence of coercion and misrepresentation. A murmur ran through the crowded room. Preston Thornton stood abruptly, his face contorted with fury. "This is a travesty. My family built this county." "You can't." "I can and I have, Mr. Thornton," Judge Crawford interrupted sharply. "The law applies equally to everyone, regardless of their wealth or standing. This feud ends today, legally and permanently. Any further aggression will be met with the full force of territorial law." As they filed out of the town hall, Nora felt as though a great weight had been lifted from her shoulders. The truth was out. Justice, long delayed, had finally been served. But Preston Thornton's parting glare promised that personal animosity wouldn't end with a legal ruling. "We should leave town immediately," Abraham advised as they gathered on the boardwalk. "Get back to the ranch before dark." They rode out within the hour, Abraham, Nora, Brody, and several Mitchell men as escorts. The journey was tense but uneventful, with everyone scanning the horizon for signs of Thornton riders. The Blackett ranch house appeared unchanged when they arrived, though it somehow looked different to Nora. Perhaps because for the first time in years, she was returning to it by choice rather than necessity. "Home," she said softly as they dismounted. "Home," Brody agreed, helping her down from her horse. Their eyes met in a moment of shared understanding. This place represented not just the past now, but possible futures as well. The next few weeks brought gradual adjustments. The Thorntons, publicly disgraced, retreated to their ranch and made no overt moves against the Blacketts, though no one believed the grudge had truly died. Brody settled into his new role on the Blackett ranch, proving his worth daily with his knowledge of cattle and his fair treatment of the other hands. Abraham, initially wary, grew to respect the younger man's judgment and work ethic. And Nora found herself in an unexpected position of freedom, no longer bound by an unwanted engagement, free to consider what she truly wanted from life. What she wanted, she realized with increasing certainty, included Brody O'Malley. Their courtship progressed slowly, respectfully. Meals shared at the family table, rides to check the northern pastures, evenings on the porch watching the stars emerge while Abraham dozed in his chair nearby. "I've been thinking," Brody said during one such evening, his voice low enough not to wake Abraham, "about the future." Nora's heart quickened. "What about it?" "Your father mentioned that the east section of the ranch, the part with the smaller creek, doesn't get much use. It's good land, just needs development." She nodded, unsure where he was going with this. "I've saved most of my wages over the years," he continued. "Enough to build a modest house, not fancy but solid, room to grow." The implications of his words sank in slowly. "Brody, are you saying?" He took her hand then, his eyes serious in the gathering darkness. "I'm saying that I love you, Nora Blackett. I think I've loved you since I first saw you across that dance floor, and if you'll have me, I'd like to build a life with you. Here, on a piece of your family's land, but our own place. Our own start." Tears sprang to Nora's eyes, not from sadness, but from an overwhelming surge of joy and relief. After years of having her future decided by others, by feuds and arrangements, here was a man asking her to choose, offering her partnership rather than possession. "Yes," she whispered, squeezing his hand. "Yes, I'll have you, Brody O'Malley." Their wedding took place that autumn after the harvest and the fall cattle drive. It was held on the Blackett Ranch under an ancient oak tree beside the creek that had once been the source of so much strife. The guest list was small: the Mitchell family, Mrs. Holloway and her grandchildren, loyal ranch hands, and a few friends from town. Marshall Bennett made an appearance, his presence a subtle reminder that the law would continue to watch over the peace. Nora wore a simple white dress ordered from Kansas City, with wildflowers in her hair instead of a formal veil. Brody, in a new suit that still couldn't quite hide his cowboy bearing, waited for her beneath the oak with an expression of such wonder that guests later remarked they'd never seen a man look more besotted. Abraham Blackett, who walked his daughter to her groom, had aged years during the feud but seemed somehow younger that day. The burden of hatred and revenge had lifted from his shoulders, replaced by hope for his daughter's happiness and the ranch's future. "Take care of each other," he said gruffly as he placed Nora's hand in Brody's. "That's all that really matters in the end." The ceremony was brief but heartfelt. As Nora and Brody exchanged vows, promises to love and protect each other through whatever challenges lay ahead, a sense of rightness settled over the gathering. This union, unlike the one that had nearly been forced upon Nora, was founded on mutual respect and genuine affection. The celebration afterward was lively good food, music from a fiddle player brought in from Dodge City, dancing that lasted well into the evening. Even Abraham was persuaded to take a turn around the makeshift dance floor with Mrs. Holloway. As the party wound down and guests began to depart, Brody led Nora away from the commotion, down to the creek bank where they could have a moment alone. "Happy?" he asked, his arms around her waist as they looked out over the water that glinted silver in the moonlight. "More than I ever thought possible," she replied honestly. "A few months ago I thought my life was over. Now it feels like it's just beginning." He pressed a gentle kiss to her forehead. "We've got our whole lives ahead of us, a home to build, land to tend, children to raise someday." Nora suggested, a hint of shyness in her voice. Brody's smile widened. "I'd like that very much. Little ones with your spirit and determination. And your kindness," she added, "your sense of justice." They stood in comfortable silence for a while, imagining the future they would build together. It wouldn't always be easy. The shadow of the feud would linger for years, and ranch life itself was demanding and sometimes dangerous. But they would face those challenges together, as partners. "Look," Brody said suddenly, pointing to the sky where a bright star streaked across the darkness. "Make a wish." Nora smiled and closed her eyes briefly, though in truth, standing there in her new husband's arms, she couldn't think of anything more to wish for. Her life, which had once seemed destined for misery, had transformed into something beautiful and full of promise. The house Brody built for them rose steadily through the winter, ready for them to move in by early spring. It was indeed modest but solid, with large windows that caught the morning light and a wraparound porch perfect for summer evenings. Most importantly, it was theirs, a home built with love rather than obligation. Life settled into new rhythms. Brody worked alongside Abraham managing the ranch, bringing fresh ideas while respecting the older man's experience. Nora, true to her earlier ambitions, began teaching reading and basic mathematics to the children of neighboring ranches 3 days a week. The Thorntons kept their distance, though occasionally there were rumors of Preston's continued bitterness. Some said he'd taken to drinking heavily. Others claimed he was plotting revenge. But as months passed without incident, these concerns gradually faded to background noise. By their first anniversary, Nora was expecting their first child. The news brought joy not just to the couple but to Abraham as well, who suddenly found new energy in the prospect of becoming a grandfather. "Boy or girl, doesn't matter," the old rancher declared, "as long as it's healthy and has its mother's good sense." The baby a boy they named Michael after Brody's father arrived on a stormy April night in 1881, with Mrs. Holloway serving as midwife. He had Nora's blue eyes and, as he grew, Brody's easy smile. Life wasn't always peaceful. There were droughts that threatened the cattle, winters harsh enough to test the strongest resolve, and occasional flare-ups with neighboring ranches over strays or grazing rights. But through it all, the foundation Nora and Brody had built remained solid. The final chapter of the Blackett-Thornton feud came unexpectedly, nearly 3 years after the wedding. Preston Thornton, drunk and armed, appeared at the Blackett ranch one evening while Brody was away checking on distant pastures. Nora, home with young Michael, saw him approaching from the window and quickly sent word to Abraham at the main house. By the time Preston reached their porch, both Nora and her father were waiting, Abraham with his shotgun at the ready, still hiding behind others. Blackett. Preston slurred, swaying slightly on his feet. His once prosperous appearance had deteriorated. His clothes were unkempt, his face haggard. "State your business and move on, Thornton," Abraham replied steadily. "There's nothing for you here." Preston's bloodshot eyes fixed on Nora. "Could have been my wife, my ranch eventually. Instead, you chose a nobody, a drifter." "I chose a good man," Nora said firmly, holding little Michael closer, "and I've never regretted it for a moment." Something in her certainty seemed to penetrate Preston's alcohol-fogged mind. He stared at her for a long moment, then at the child in her arms. "We're selling," he said abruptly. "The whole Thornton spread, moving to California." Abraham lowered his shotgun slightly. "Is that so? Ranch is cursed now, bad memories, bad business." Preston laughed bitterly. "You won, Blackett. The mighty Thorntons, driven out by a family that was nothing when we arrived." "Nobody won this feud, Preston," Abraham said quietly. "Too many people hurt, too many years wasted." Preston didn't acknowledge this truth. He simply tipped his hat sloppily, turned his horse, and rode away. It was the last time anyone in the county saw him. The Thornton Ranch was indeed sold the following month to an investment company from Chicago. That night, when Brody returned home to find Nora and Abraham discussing the encounter, his first reaction was concern for their safety. His second was relief that a chapter had finally, truly closed. "You think he meant it?" Brody asked. "About leaving for good?" "Yes," Abraham nodded. "He's a broken man. Nothing left for him here but bad memories." As they sat together on the porch, Michael sleeping peacefully in his cradle nearby, Nora felt a profound sense of closure. The feud that had shaped so much of her life was truly ending, not through more violence or forced arrangements, but through exhaustion and the simple passage of time. "What will happen to the Thornton land?" she wondered aloud. "The Chicago company plans to divide it," Abraham explained. "Sell it in parcels to smaller ranchers. It's the end of an era." Brody took Nora's hand, squeezing it gently. "Maybe it's the beginning of a better one, More families, more children for your school. She smiled at the thought. Her small classroom had already grown to 12 students ranging from 5 to 15 years old. The idea of more families settling in the area was appealing. Life continued to unfold in unexpected ways. The following year brought another child, a daughter they named Elizabeth, after Nora's mother. Abraham, now in his 60s, gradually handed more responsibility for the ranch to Brody, spending more time with his grandchildren and occasionally courting the widowed Mrs. Holloway, much to everyone's amusement and approval. The divided Thornton land did indeed bring new neighbors, creating a more diverse and cooperative community. Nora's school grew to the point that the county finally agreed to build a proper schoolhouse, with Nora as its first official teacher. By 1885, their family had grown again with the birth of twins James and Joseph, boisterous boys who kept the entire household on its toes. The original Blackett Ranch had expanded too, incorporating some of the former Thornton land when it became available. On warm summer evenings, Nora and Brody would often sit on their porch, watching their children play in the yard and marveling at the life they'd built together. "Do you ever think about how differently things might have turned out?" Nora asked one such evening. "If you hadn't come to the ranch that morning, if you hadn't taken me away," Brody considered the question, his arm around her shoulders. "Sometimes, but I try not to dwell on might-have-beens. I knew from the moment I saw you that I couldn't let you marry Thornton. Everything after that was just finding our way to where we were meant to be." "Our destiny," Nora teased gently. He smiled. "If you want to call it that, I just call it the best decision I ever made." As twilight deepened into night and their children were tucked into bed with stories and kisses, Nora reflected on the journey that had brought them here. From a young woman with no choices to a wife, mother, and respected teacher. From a feud's potential casualty to the heart of a thriving family. And Brody, the cowboy who had risked everything to save her from a loveless marriage, had become not just her husband but her partner in every sense, supporting her dreams as she supported his. The old feud was now little more than a story told by old-timers in Dodge City saloons. The next generation would grow up knowing peace instead of animosity, cooperation instead of conflict. As they prepared for bed that night, Brody pulled Nora close, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Happy?" he asked, just as he had on their wedding night. "Completely," she answered truthfully. "And grateful, every day, for the cowboy who started a bigger feud and took me away." He laughed softly. "Best trouble I ever caused." Outside their window, the Kansas stars shone brilliantly over the land that had seen so much strife but now nurtured their growing family. The creek that had once been fought over now watered crops and cattle alike, sustaining life rather than dividing it. And in the quiet of their room, Nora and Brody held each other close, secure in the knowledge that they had not just survived a feud, but had transformed it into the foundation for a legacy of love that would endure long after the last shots fired in anger were forgotten.